Hey everybody, we're down to the last video on the XLS Encore build. We're just going to get these things buttoned up and get them back up and playing. So next step is we have to solder all the connections to the drivers and get them mounted. And the first thing we're going to do is just tin the connections on the back of the drivers or on the terminals of the drivers. And to do that, we're going to have to heat these terminals up a little bit and get a little solder on them and feed some solder into it, so we have a solder pool that's on the terminals but not something we've dripped on it. We actually have to heat those things up. So what we need is the soldering iron to be hot. We want to put it on it and feed solder onto it just like that, and it just takes a few seconds to solder it. Again, if you're soldering, you don't want to hold your face over this stuff. You don't want the smoke, which is mainly from the flux, to get in your face. So as long as you're away from it, you're fine. If you want, wear a mask. There's nothing wrong with wearing a mask. And just like that, we have tinned the terminals. Now, I also did a full-length video on soldering to show you guys how to solder and how to solder connections and tin things and all that stuff. And if you need to, go catch that video. That was a good video. I'm just standing these drivers up on my wire cutters just to give them a little bit of a tilt, and that kind of flattens out the terminals so that the solder, while it's really hot, doesn't just puddle and roll right off because it's tilted downward. So that's the only reason I'm just standing these up on my wire cutters. So that's it for that one. Ready to go. Last one. And I'll try to turn this one so you guys can see it a little bit. I don't know how well the camera is going to focus on it, but hopefully you can see. All I'm doing is getting a little solder on the tip. I'm putting it on and just feeding a little solder onto it. You never want to poke the wire through the holes that are shown on the terminals. Terminals always have a hole there. That's not for poking the wire through and then trying to solder it. You want to tin it first, and you can tin it right over that little circle. Also, there's a narrow terminal and a wide terminal. The wide one is always positive. That's an industry standard. So anytime you're soldering this stuff together and you see a wide one and you see a narrow one, the wide one's always positive. So the next thing you want to do is to tin the wire, and it's kind of just the same way that you tinned the terminal. You want a little solder on your tip, and you're going to feed it in one side and down the other. You also want to make sure when you're doing this that you're doing it on something that you don't mind dripping solder on. This is an old work table, and I drip solder all over it all the time. If you do drip solder on something, don't worry about it. Don't try to get it off right then. Hurry, it's going to cause damage. It's too late, it already dripped. What you do is you just wait for it to solidify and cool off, and typically it'll flip right off. Since what it dripped on was not hot, it doesn't bond to whatever it dripped on, so it'll just come right off. So one more. And I've got that covered. And that's it for tinning the wires. Next, we're going to drop the drivers onto the boxes. And what we're going to do that is just flip them over upside down. And this is where you want to remember to put your heat shrink on. Oh, there, just lost one. Reach in there and get that one. You want to put your heat shrink on first, as if you put it on, you can't put it on after you've already soldered it on. Alright. Now, tweeter, usually just set it up to where it's on the side of the cabinet, and you want to position everything so that it is easy for it to reach. Again, you want to get solder on your tip and then position it on there. You want to press it straight against it so it's flat against it, making as much contact as possible. And then you want to heat that thing up so that you're melting the solder and you're causing a new puddle or a pool for it to go together, and then just wait for it to solidify. There's the positive one on that. And then we're going to go over to the negative side. Again, we want this thing positioned so that when you press it against it, that it is making solid contact on it. You want as much surface contact as possible. And just solder it right on. And that's it. Takes a few seconds. Then you want to let it cool a little bit before letting go. That's it, tweeter soldered. Now the next thing we'll do is we'll slide that heat shrink up there and shrink that heat shrink on it, get it sealed, and then we'll mount it in the hole. So heat shrink. Slide that one up. Sometimes you may have to hold it on there just a little bit. Get it start squeezing. And then you can go around it. Heat it up. Get a good seal. Connection sealed. Next we're going to drop it in the hole. You have to turn it so that it fits the slot that you've made. I have to get up to where I can see it and line it up. Alright, and that's in there. Now we got a woofer to do. We can do the woofer the same way. Stand it up on the side of the cabinet. So make sure you guys can see it. Again, we're going to get our soldering iron tip hot. Going to feed some solder onto it. Position it so that it's making solid contact. You can also heat up the wire first so that it's hot, and then you're dropping it straight on to the connection and soldering it on. And then just be sure and let it cool before you let go of it. That one I really don't like. I wasn't making good contact. I'm going to do it again. Always make sure your solder tip is clean. After doing 3 or 4, you want to do it. You might want to clean it. Okay, solder on the tip. Press it flat against it. And there we go. First go around I was positioning it a little high. I was trying to hold it where you guys could see it and I couldn't see it. There we go. Now the last one. And I'm going to twist on it a little bit, get it to where it lines up. There we go. Again, soldering iron hot, solder on the tip, set it flat on it. You want to heat up the wire first and then stick it onto the terminal. And it should take just a few seconds for it to make a nice puddle. And it's on. Last, we're going to slide up the heat shrink. Go. I know some of you guys like to use a little lighter. You can wave a lighter under this thing and shrink it that way, but heat gun works best. And that's it. We're going to drop the drivers in their spots and screw them down. The next phase is taking it over to the measuring system, and I'll do some measuring and testing on it, and we'll look at the frequency response and all the measurements.